Welcome everyone to this week's episode of The Halal Gap. My name is Sophia and I'm here with Shamail, and joining us today is an amazing photographer from right here in Edmonton, Shahroze Khan.
Shahroze Khan is a photographer and a writer. Currently, he's in school fulfilling his love of history, politics, and sociology, and uses his photography to express those disciplines.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Shahroze, what led you to photography? How did you realize your passion for it?
I was in grade 10, actually. I started taking classes for photography, and I think that really changed the way I used to look at, before I was into like drawing and art and painting and everything, but once I got into photography, I started seeing like how I can capture more realistic objects than just my painting. I'm not a realistic painter, so I wanted to do something else that would capture it. And also, like growing up, I used to read a lot of like National Geographic and all of these photographic magazines that really helped me develop my love of photography. And it was more of like I was always there, but I didn't discover it until I started taking classes in grade 10, and from there onwards I've been doing photography.
Okay. Cool. So what are your favorite things to photograph?
I really like incorporating like different cultures and different people in my photography more than anything else, because I think a lot of the times we always get like buildings, we always get like traditional like the New York landscape or something like that. But then a lot of times the people go missing in these, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I personally like looking at like minorities and underrepresented communities and how to photograph them, basically, right? Whether that's including their diversity, their diverse experiences, or including their every single aspect of it in a respectful way. Because when white photographers do it, it becomes a really like an Orientalist lens. And I, having learned a lot of my photography skills from like non-white photographers, I want to be aware of that and step away from that and have a more humanistic and realistic approach to photography.
So how do you do that? Like when you're approaching subjects, if the subjects are people, how do you ensure that you're kind of like doing that?
I think one easy thing that we as photographers do is fall into the trap, like Orientalist trap, as in like, for instance, when someone goes to India, the first thing they want to photograph is like a snake charmer, or like a Hindu ceremony or some sort, right? That's very exoticized, that's very dehumanized in a way. And it's rarely we get pictures of like people smiling in India, right? Rarely we get pictures of people just playing in India. We get pictures of like the misery of the slums. We get pictures, and even like Africa, right? We get pictures of like lions. We don't get pictures of people there. Mm-hmm. We don't see their smiles. We don't see that everyday humanization of people from the Middle East, India, and like Africa. So I think that's one thing I really like look forward to in my photography, and that's one thing I try to break through from like mainstream photography.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good. So a lot of your recent work focuses on traditional country life in Lahore, and was it a conscious choice to capture this aesthetic?
Yes. So I think I'm being born in Lahore. I have a special attachment to Lahore. It's like a 2,000-year-old city, and it's been like one of the oldest cities in South Asia, and plus it has a huge rich history that has been that has seen like a lot of empires come and go from Lahore. So I think Lahore has that rich history that a lot of people miss in Pakistan, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of when you think of like international cities, you don't think of Lahore. You don't think of traditionally South Asian cities. You think of like New York, London, Paris, and you don't think of Lahore or like Tehran or like all of these Middle Eastern cities. So for me, what I wanted to do when I went to Lahore this time was essentially capture a day in life of Lahore, right? Whether that's the old mosques, which are more than 5 centuries old, or whether there's old temples that are more than more than a millennia old, right? So it's just capturing the realism and the everyday life of a simple day Lahore. And then Lahore isn't just like the urban life that's there, but there's also the rural life in Lahore, which is very traditional life. Like it feels like when I step back in my village, it feels like I'm stepping back in time, almost in a sense that like the rural Lahore is almost timeless, right? It hasn't been able to. It's not that it hasn't been able to catch up to history. It's like it doesn't want to catch up to modernization, I guess. They're very simplistic life, and they're happy living the way they are. And I think that's what I wanted to capture this time when I went.
That's very cool. So you've got Lahore, and then you had an incredible photo series that we had showcased at last year's Mosquers Film Festival, photos that you had taken during your time in Palestine. So like, how do you pick the places that you go and the things you want to photograph there? Like, what kind of makes you choose them?
Yeah, I think, well, like I really don't, I don't go there just to photograph them. I go there to actually make sure I'm having an authentic experience there. And I've been to other places like London, Paris, and like Tokyo, but it hasn't been the same to me personally, right? I feel like those cities, like that I just described, London, like Paris and Tokyo, they're very prominent. They're very prominent in the way that the West sees them, right? They're very prominent in photography, they're very prominent in culture, and they're well represented in all of these aspects and disciplines. But for a place like Palestine and a place like Lahore, that's not the case, right? The only time we hear of Palestine is the Israel-Palestine war or the conflict that's going on there, and we don't actually hear about the everyday lives of Palestine, right? Before I went, I tried like researching pictures of Palestine, and all I got was like children running away from gas canisters. Or like bombs and like very much this oppression that was captured in pictures, which is a very real part of Palestine. But then there's also like the everyday life of Palestinians. Mm-hmm. They have weddings, they have celebrations, they have just random days walking in the old city, right? And these are like historical cities, some more than like 4,000 years old. And I think that's what we need to also like when we're having this discussion about photography and our what photography entails. I think we need to go back to like how we photograph such locations, right? It's not just about photographing Palestine and then putting it on a display, right? For me, it was more of like I was telling a story that I was asked to tell, right? I was in Palestine for a month and a half, and I essentially a Palestinian family adopted me. I was living with them. I was cooking with them. It was a very homey feeling there, and like I say, I left half of my heart in Palestine because of the fact it made me their own, right? Yeah. And I think that's what I wanted to capture in my photography, and it wasn't just traditional like whatever motifs or themes or anything else we have that is always stereotypical of Palestine, and moving away from that was like capturing the beauty of like the old cities of Nablus, capturing the resistance, but also a beautiful resistance, which was the kite runners picture, mm-hmm. right? And I think just like being aware of those mindsets is like important to me when I go to these places to take pictures.
So it kind of sounds like you feel a huge sense of responsibility to kind of represent people from these places in a different way than they normally are. So like where do you think that comes from? 100%.
I think there is that sense of responsibility for me because growing up, I wasn't born here, but I grew up here. I moved to Canada when I was 10, and growing up here, I really like did not even see anything about like Lahore or Pakistan or like even like the proper representation of the Middle East. I think it was like the Homeland, I think it's called mm-hmm. Homeland. Yeah, like that was the first time I heard Pakistan in like Hollywood, and it was like. And it wasn't even something I was aware of. I'm like, where is this Pakistan that they're talking about, right? I'm from there. Yeah. I don't know what they're talking about. Like like how in Homeland everyone wears the hijab and the niqab sometimes, and I'm like, that's not the reality in Pakistan. Yeah. And same with Palestine. I think when I went to Palestine, I wanted to ensure that there was a sense of more responsible depictions of Palestinians, right? And when I was coming back, I actually, that was what I was asked of from my Palestinian friends. They're like, a lot of people don't know just the basic truths of Palestine, right? Mm-hmm. And basically, I wanted to represent what I felt and what I saw, rather than like some exoticized fantasy about Palestine, right? Mm-hmm. And also, I think another thing that we need to be aware of when we are, because I am a Westerner, but when we Westerners go to these places, we need to be aware of our privilege as well, right? Rather than trying to speak for them, we should amplify their voices, mm-hmm. right? Because it's not like they don't have a voice. but rather it's just some people choose not to hear those voices. And I think when we adopt that mindset of like amplifying their voice, it can help us not only become better photographers or storytellers, but like more compassionate beings towards their cause.
For sure. That's awesome.
Do you think you also use your photography through a Muslim lens?
For sure, yeah. I definitely, because whenever I go to places, I try looking at like more the Islamic history that has been there, right? When I went to Tokyo, for instance, I went to Shibuya and all these amazing places, but I also went to the oldest mosque in Tokyo, which was really beautiful. It felt like we stepped into Istanbul, right? It was a Turkish designed mosque back when the Ottoman Empire, and it was very beautifully designed, and it was like, I've never been to Istanbul, but like I thought that's what Istanbul probably looks like, right? It had a huge courtyard, it had a huge domes and everything, but like the Qurans there were in Japanese. So that was really interesting to me. So yeah, Muslim lens is definitely something I've inherited from my religion, and I think I'm really proud of that, because it, more than anything, it allows me to connect with the Muslims there on a more human level. Right? There's a brothership there. That perhaps that's my male privilege speaking, because I know a lot of women that are traveling alone in the Middle East don't have the same experiences. But from what I saw, it was like I could literally be on the street in Palestine and ask for a ride, like hitchhike, and they would drop me off safe. I had the confidence that like I would get to my destination safely.
That's cool. So did you kind of create any special relationships through these travels that you would like to tell us about? Any kind of ones that stick with you?
Yeah, for sure. I think literally, like, I think I have so many relationships like that I'm still like very attached to from Palestine and Lahore, and even in Japan. One of the things in Palestine that I saw was like the rich history of that place. It's not just a landlocked place. It's before like the creation of Israel, there was a huge history in that place, a history of migration, a history of movement in that place. And one woman that I met, she was actually, I have her on my Instagram, she was actually a refugee from the Spanish Civil War in 1930s that came to Palestine to seek refuge, right? And when she was, I met her randomly walking in the old city of Nablus, and I had a touristy hat on and I had a touristy backpack on, and I was walking down the street, and she stopped me because she thought I could speak Spanish, because she recognized I was a tourist. And she thought I could speak Spanish, but I was like, I don't speak Spanish. But my friend who was with me, he spoke Spanish.
Nice.
So that formula, like, she sat us down. We sat down with her. We went to her house, and they gave us tea. And she was a really old woman. I think she was in her 90s at that time. May God give her more life. But it was just an amazing moment where, like, I was invited into her house for tea and for just snacks, and I got to hear her story, her journey from Spain, when Spain was in the ruins, to Palestine, which was very peaceful at that time. So that was really interesting. She was like, I've seen my city and my country go through a lot, but I'm still here. Like, Palestinians are still here. So that's something like I really hold closely to my heart.
Because that's very cool, because you don't think of Palestine as a place where refugees are going to go to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it kind of is a reminder that they have this history that is never talked about, as you're mentioning, that's never really brought to light. And that's
100%.
Such a cool perspective that you got from her.
And I think that's what, like, also, like, even though I take a lot of pictures, I think what I cannot express through the pictures is sometimes like the realistic, the feelings that I get when I'm talking to these people, right? You have to be there to experience it, and I try best to like capture them in my picture, but sometimes you can't capture all the human feelings associated with that moment when you're sharing tea with like a Spanish refugee in Palestine, right?
Right. What a crazy life. That's like the coolest thing. Yeah, fair enough.
So you incorporate lots of dramatic contrast into your photographs. So do you feel that you hope to set a certain mood on the viewer through these choices?
For sure. I think, especially some of my pictures that have silhouettes in them, I do that on purpose, and I try to make sure that there is a more like shapes are emphasized, and wanting to make sure that the colors are emphasized. But sometimes I want the colors not to be present there, because there's a certain tone I'm trying to go for, and I think that always depends on the like specific pictures and how I capture them and where I capture them. For instance, I think the mood always depends on, like, hopefully, like the mood that I'm, like, overarching mood is going to be about like a truthful telling of like my journey to either Palestine or Lahore or Tokyo, and making sure that it is like that is always present, whether that's like that's a sad story, whether that's a story of sorrow, or whether that's a story of happiness.
Cool. And like stylistically, do you think you have any other trademarks that you typically try to include in your photography, or ways that you try to shoot things?
For sure, I try to like get a different angle from like what, like trying to go away from what's been traditionally shot already. So like for instance, if you look at the Alexa picture that I have, a lot of the times you see the whole of Alexa in any picture that you see. But for me, I wanted to like capture, because I wanted to capture the detail, because a lot of times you don't get to see the detail in all these pictures about Alexa. But I wanted to make sure that the detail was there, and like it is framed. I like to make sure there's a certain framing of my pictures.
Fair enough. And then are there like things that you, in every single place you visited, like things that you specifically look for in terms of themes or subjects, or things that you're like, I need to get this photo in, like that's your baseline kind of thing?
I try to look for like an old building, because I wanted to make I like the older the better, because I know all of these places that I go to have a huge amount of history in them. They're not like Edmonton or Calgary or like Toronto, right? These are ancient civilizations that have existed for thousands of years. So there's got to be some remnants or some something to pay homage to that, right? Whether it's like a really old mosque in the middle of an alley that no one visits, but it's like one of the oldest mosques there, or whether it's just an old church in Jerusalem, right? So I think that becomes very prominent for me, because I'm a student of history, like I mentioned, and I want to make sure that the history that I'm telling through the pictures has an authentic perspective on for the land and for the people too.
Cool. And also on that note, are there any kind of future goals or like places you have that you want to go kind of over the next couple of years? Yeah,
I really want to go to Iran.
Yeah.
Iran has like one of the largest, like the most rich history in that region, in my opinion. And I think that would be a really cool trip, because I could spend literally like years in Iran and still not experience the whole of Iran, right?
Yeah.
But like one place that's really close to my heart is Afghanistan, and I really want to go to Afghanistan. I don't know when that will be, but inshallah it'll be soon, and it's also because like I do, like my ancestors come from Afghanistan, so I want to make sure I'm seeing the land that my ancestors came from, even though like I am, like we've been settled in Lahore for a few generations. There's still that I feel like there's a longing for your ancestral home.
For sure, yeah. That's very, very cool. Hopefully you get to go soon. Okay, that's you.
So as you know, our podcast is called The Halal Gap, and we hope it addresses the gap that exists when we look for Muslim minds, artists, and creatives in the world of art and film. So have you ever personally felt that gap?
100%.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the main reasons I even approached organizations like Mosquers and the Green Room, is because they are trying to make sure that the gap that already exists in representation or in media and mainstream media is lessened, or is like reduced, as to we can make our own spaces, and we can make our own safe spaces where we're free to tell our narratives, whether it's however uncomfortable it makes the mainstream world, the Western world, the white world. But this is our safe space, and we can tell our stories the way we want. I remember talking to you when I was doing when I was starting my exhibition, and I was like, "Are you sure that this won't, like some of the pictures named?" I was like, "Maybe what if it offends someone? Like I don't want to offend I don't know what kind of people come to the Mosquers, but like what if there's like someone like a pro-Israeli there?" And you're like, "You know what? No, this is our space."
Yeah, I was like, "It's fine."
Yeah, you're like, "It's fine."
They will learn. It'll be okay.
Yeah. So I think that's really cool, because something like the Halal Gap or Mosquers make sure that our stories are being told the way we want them to be told, and they're not being censored like they would be in the mainstream.
You're taking hold of that narrative.
Exactly, and I think that's very important for us to do, especially as a Muslim diaspora, as we continue to grow as a diaspora and like have our roots in the West now. We need to ensure that proper spaces that we can tell our stories are being told, and that we're not being shy of telling them. I remember when I attended Mosquers 2 years ago, there was this story of LGBTQ Muslims in India, right? Which was like very enlightening to me, because I don't think that would have been the case in any other, even like Muslim organization, where like it isn't a safe space for LGBTQ Muslims, right? So I think that becomes like, that's why something like the Halal Gap or the Mosquers are essential for our community to grow, and to have like a conversation around that, around everything basically within ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of like any new photographers, Muslim photographers that are on the scene, do you have any advice based on your experiences that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, I want to say like, don't like, one of the things that we tend to do, and I did that as a young photographer too, is like idolize like Western photographers that like exoticize our culture, or like have only one way of looking at our culture, whether it's war, whether it's repression, like the hijab is repressed, and they have like a woman looking over a cliff with a hijab on or a niqab on or something like that. That's a very traditional image, like a faceless woman, right? Faceless Muslim woman. I just want to say like, you should seek your own narratives. You shouldn't try to recreate those narratives, but like rather seek authentic narratives that exist within your community and within your rich history as Muslims, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, because even I felt that when Steve McCurry, for instance, he's like one of the most famous photographers in the world, and his majority of his photography happens in the Middle East / India, right? And what that leads to is like, there's no consent. Often in his pictures, the consent is removed. So like, he takes pictures of like intimate moments, whether it's like a Hindu woman bathing in the Ganges, but it's a holy bath for them, right? And that's supposed to be intimate with God and themselves. And then he captures this image without their permission, right? Or whether it's talking about the famous Afghan girl that you might have heard of. You've seen her face, right? The National Geographic.
Yeah.
But like, a lot of people don't know the story of her, which is like, she didn't want that picture taken, right? She didn't. So there were like how that whole scenario happened was that she didn't want her picture to be taken, and then Steve McCurry, who's the photographer, he forced her principal to actually like be present, be a model for him, right? So like, and she didn't gain any, so that launched his career, but she's still a refugee in Pakistan, right? So like, that's what I'm trying to do. A lot of people, Muslim photographers themselves, there's this tendency to follow in the footsteps of these people, and I say like, no, we have our own great photographers and great travelers that we should follow instead.
So do you have any further advice on how to do that? Because that seems like it'd be a pretty hefty challenge to overcome.
For sure. I think it's one thing like to just like challenge the way you're looking at stuff, challenge the way you're photographing yourself, like photographing yourself, critiquing everything you do, and making sure that you have like a basic understanding of like what Orientalism is, like Edward Said's Orientalism. I think that's missing in our community, and how to like move beyond Orientalism, which is like seeking authentic narratives, whether that's like whenever the diaspora goes back home, they always want to capture these very specific images, whether that's like in the rural life, in the village, or anything like that, and it becomes a very like poverty porn. Like, you don't want any, I mean, poverty certainly exists in our countries, but there's also other ways to showcase that, right? In a way that you're creating a more meaningful conversation, rather than just reinforcing whatever the West believes about us.
Yeah, fair enough. And you kind of need to make sure that you're, as you said, like holding space for those perspectives, because we don't have them. And then like, how else are people gonna perceive us if all they see are these, you know, specific images that are not necessarily flattering or true?
Yeah. And I think that's exactly it. And like a space like the Halal Gap certainly creates space for those conversations to be had, right? And hopefully, like when people are listening to this, it becomes more than just critiquing a lot of stuff, but it's more like, how do we build our spaces that are more authentic and more true to where we come from and what we do now, right? Yeah.
Well, thank you for being our hype man this whole time, just telling us how awesome this is.
Well, you guys are awesome.
Thank you. And did you have any other questions?
Oh, that's it.
Okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to share with the listeners, or anything in terms of some? Do you have any other exhibits coming up, or any other plans for your work? Anything?
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm doing, and I guess this isn't inclusive, is I'm trying to create a ethnographic series of like Muslims in Alberta, and I think that will be coming out maybe in September, if not next year. But like, that's also a way to challenge what has already been out there about Muslims in Alberta. we're a diverse community. We're not just Sunnis or Shias. There's Ismailis here, there's Ahmadis here, and all of these different types of Muslims deserve to be included in the conversation of like what Muslim in Alberta looks like, right? And same with like the traditional idea of like how like photography is not traditionally something Muslims do. But I would encourage you. It's like, yeah, even if you want to have like a camera from like Walmart, that's remember those cameras that you could buy, disposable cameras? Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day. Even if you start from that and capture what is in your community, in your household, in your mosque, in your Jamaat Khana, in your Husseiniya, anything like that, make sure like you're in charge of the story you're telling, and you're not letting other people do that for you.
So where can we find you online?
So mostly I'm on Instagram, which is at Shahroze KK, SHAHROZEKK. And yeah, I'm going to be launching my website soon, which I will give it to you guys as hopefully before this episode comes out. But other than that, I'm mostly on Instagram. And if you want to reach out on Facebook, my name is Shahroze on Facebook. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And thank you guys for listening and being with us on this journey as we aim to close the gap.